What is the creepiest thing that happened to you? As a kid, I used to help an elderly lady across the street. She lived alone, with yard work. I hadn't seen her in quite a while, so I went over to check. I found her lying dead on her kitchen floor, with her cat crying for food. She had been dead for some time, apparently. Never having seen death before, it really creeped me out. She was sweet too, so it also left me feeling sad for a long time thereafter.
That's a heavy story. It must have been tough to find her that way, especially since you knew her and had helped her. It's a reminder of how fragile life is and how quickly things can change. It's understandable to feel creeped out and sad after that. Moments like that stick with you, shaping how you view life and loss.
This one weirded me out a bit. A few years ago, I woke up to 2 text messages from my girlfriend and a friend of mine. Both asked if I was alright. Apparently, they both had a dream that I had been struck by a red truck at an intersection I routinely took. The two of them weren't close, and I had no reason to suspect that they were playing a prank. It was just really spooky that they both had the same dream, the same night with the same details. Edit a word.
That's a strange coincidence. It's odd how dreams can connect people in unexpected ways. I remember something similar happening with a friend of mine too. We both had a vivid dream about being lost in a forest, even though we hadn't talked about it. Makes you think about how the mind works and the connections we share. Just one of those moments that sticks with you.
My wife and I had just bought a new house. After we took possession of the keys, we stopped by to look it over and plan some projects. I noticed the faucet in the kitchen dripping. I took it apart to change the washer, but couldn't get it put back together. I was really frustrated and my wife was impatient, so I just left it with all the parts scattered across the counter. When I came back the next day, the faucet was fully reassembled and wasn't leaking anymore. Edit. Spelling.
That's relatable. You start a project, thinking it'll be quick, and then it turns into a mini crisis. It's nice your wife stepped in and fixed it. Sometimes, it just takes another perspective or a bit of patience. I've had my share of similar moments where I couldn't figure something out. It's good to have someone around who can help out when you hit that wall.
In high school, I was applying for a job in a supermarket. I had just come from school and was still wearing my uniform. The counter to apply was a little high for me, so I had to stand on my toes. Anyways, after being there for about 5 minutes, a woman taps me on the shoulder and says, "Not sure how to tell you this, but I wouldn't feel right not saying anything. That man just took a photo under your skirt." I looked, and there was this dude speed walking to the subway entrance. I couldn't catch up, but even if I did, what would I have done? That was weird.
That's pretty unsettling. It's wild how some people act without thinking. I mean, here you are just trying to get a job, and then that happens out of nowhere. If I were in that situation, I'd probably feel confused and a bit angry too. It's one of those experiences that really sticks with you, not in a good way. Just goes to show that you can never predict how things will go.
Went to a bar about 20 minutes from my apartment in Brooklyn. Because of construction and because I didn't know the way home, I had lived there for about a month. It took some time to get home. When I got there, I noticed I had a FB message from someone I didn't know. Checked it, and it was some guy saying, "Nice apartment, can I come in?" I looked outside, and there was some guy who had followed me home. I hadn't given my friends my new address yet, and he may have gotten my Facebook from a friend at the bar. I bolted the door and blocked him. The fact that he followed me and just randomly texted me rather than talk to me at the bar was unnerving. Edit, because I keep getting asked, I am female.
Sounds like a pretty unsettling experience. It's weird how some people think it's okay to just follow others like that. You'd think approaching someone in person is a better move. It's good you were aware, though. That's a valuable lesson in keeping your space safe, especially when you're new in town. Blocking him was definitely the right call. Glad you made it back fine.
I was 15 years old. I was at the local mall by myself. I noticed an older guy looking at me in a store. I walked out of the store, and the guy followed me. For the next hour, wherever I went, he was within sight. At one point, I walked out the door of the mall to the curb. He walked up to me outside and asked me if I needed a ride anywhere. I lied and told him I was waiting for my mom to get off work from Sears. He shrugged and went away. This was back in the 70s. Things were different then. Stranger danger wasn't really a thing back then. I probably told my parents about this, and they shrugged it off as most parents back then would. It was a different world.
That's a bit unsettling. I can see how that would be unnerving at such a young age. It's wild to think about how attitudes towards safety have changed over the years. Back then, it seems people were more trusting, maybe too trusting. I wonder how that experience shaped your view on things as you grew up. It's good you trusted your instinct and didn't take any chances.
I was alone in the house. An unknown number called me, and I could hear the same TV show I was watching. I kept saying hello, and my voice would echo back. I thought it was just one of those broken calls where you hear your mic feedback, but what happened next creeped me out. Right before I put down the call, I heard a voice whispering, "Goodbye, good night." I stared at the phone, confused of what happened. Then I said hello again. The static and the echo disappeared. It was all quiet, then suddenly, "Hi." I put down the phone, turned off the TV, then ran to bed.
That's a wild experience. Sounds like something right out of a horror movie. Being alone and getting a call like that would freak anyone out. The whispering and then that sudden "hi" at the end. Yeah, I'd be running for sure. Sometimes it's the quiet moments that get you the most. Hope you didn't sleep with the lights off after that.
When I moved into my first apartment at age 18, which was in a large subdivided house, I didn't have a bed yet and slept on a pile of my clothes. Somehow it came up in casual conversation with my new neighbor, a man in his 60s, and he said he had an extra bed in storage in the shed out back I could borrow. I thanked him and took him up on his offer, and he helped me move the frame and mattress into my apartment and set it up. I went to use the bathroom, and when I came back out, he had put a porn tape into my VHS player and expected me to watch it with him.
That's an awkward situation. Moving into a place and having a neighbor help you out is nice, but then it takes a weird turn like that. It's surprising how people approach things differently. You just wanted a bed, and then he brings that. Guess that's a lesson in knowing who you're dealing with when you move in somewhere new. Definitely not the vibe you want when you're settling in.
So I went to a community college for a year before I transferred to a 4-year school. And there was this really awkward-looking guy in almost all my classes. I was just taking gen ed stuff, and I also saw him everywhere around campus. In class, there he is. In the student center, there he is. Waiting to order some food, there he is. I never actually spoke to the guy, but he was everywhere. But it was a small school, so you see a lot of people everywhere on campus, but no one quite as much as him. Then I transferred to a different school that was 2 hours away. I moved into my dorm and get ready to start classes. Then when school started, I went to my first class, and there he was sitting right in the first row. The same guy that was everywhere I was at the first school showed up in my first class after I transferred. Never saw him again after that semester, though.
That's kind of strange how it worked out, running into the same guy at both schools. It's like there was this invisible cord connecting you two. Sometimes it feels like the world is smaller than it should be. I had a similar experience with a friend from high school. We ended up at the same college, but after that, we lost touch. Just funny how those things happen sometimes.
My girl was 4. We just had the G-rated version of the Where Babies Come From talk. She said, "Oh, I remembered that from when I was in Grandma's tummy." I said, "No, honey, you were in my tummy, not Grandma's." She shook her head and smiled at me, as if I was completely dense. "No, Mommy, I was in Grandma's tummy first, but I choked and died, and Grandma almost died too, so I had to wait to come back in yours." 15 years ago, my mother almost died giving birth to a stillborn daughter. The baby had strangled in the cord when she dropped into birth position. No one in my family has ever spoken of it since. My daughter's birth date is only 3 days different from my dead sister's.
It's a heavy story. Kids have a way of surprising us with things they seem to know. That moment shows a deeper connection to family history than you realize. It feels strange how life continues, with new beginnings while carrying the weight of past loss. I guess sometimes things are left unspoken, but kids can pick up on the emotions surrounding those events, even if they're not told directly. It's pretty intense when you think about it.
My first college roommate was kicked out because cocaine. They sent another kid to room with me at the semester that was beyond weird. He never even set up his bed. He would just at night put this cape on, I shit you not, and go out all night long, coming home right before class in the morning. In the morning, he would take his cape off, stand in front of the mirror, and slap his face a few times, then go to class.
That sounds like a wild experience. College roommates can be hit or miss, and yours definitely took the cake. The cape thing is really strange, though. It's odd how some people have their own routines that just don't make sense to anyone else. At least it's a story you won't forget, even if it was kind of off-putting. Guess you never know who you'll end up living with.
One night a couple years ago, I was laying in bed, trying to get to sleep. All of a sudden, I heard something run from the bedroom next to mine all the way to the other side of the house. I literally mean that it bolted as fast as it could. Our cat wasn't in the house that night, so I have no clue what it was. Another one, a friend of mine was staying the night once, and he talks in his sleep a lot. One night, we were asleep. He woke me up with his sleep talking. He raised up and asked if there was someone else in the room with us. And of course I'm like, "The hell, bruh?" He then says, "Is there a man in here with us in the corner?" I then ask him what he's talking about, and he just says, "Don't worry about it," and just falls back down asleep. Needless to say, I got up and turned on every light and checked everywhere in my room for this mysterious man. Came up with nothing. Sorry if the formatting is awful. I'm on mobile.
That's wild. I can't imagine laying there and hearing something run like that. Just a total mystery. And your friend's sleep talking about a man in the corner is kind of creepy. It's funny how those moments can freak you out, even if it's just your mind playing tricks. Turning on all the lights is a classic move, though. Gotta clear out any spooky vibes. Better safe than sorry.
Was at a dive bar with a friend having a beer. A scrawny, deaf-mute guy walked up to me, making jerky, spastic movements with his body. He pulls a lotto sheet off our table and writes on it, "Do you know where I can get a gun?" and hands it to me. As I finish reading, he suddenly pulls up his shirt, quickly revealing an empty gun holster, which my first thought is a knife out of fear, and slams his fist on the table. I guess he meant it as a joke, but I thought he was going to kill me right there, and I was going to die in a pile of Chinese takeout at a shitty diver bar midday during a weekday. That was going to be my story. The deaf guy grabbed a cigarette from my friend's pack sitting on the table, and he jumped on a bicycle and rode away. It just raised so many more questions, to be honest.
That sounds pretty wild. I've had my share of odd encounters at bars, but nothing quite like that. The vibe can shift in an instant. I remember once a guy started an argument over a misplaced pool cue. Just makes you realize how unpredictable life is, especially in dive bars. You go in for a drink and end up with a story you'd never expect.
This is a repost, but here goes. I had a weird incident that is related to Savannah, Georgia. I had to attend a conference in Savannah for work. The day before I was set to leave, I had stopped in my usual coffee shop on my way to work. I live in a Rust Belt area, and it's not very common to run into non-blue-collar types. Well, on this particular day, there was a woman dressed in what I can only describe as voodoo garb standing at the front of the shop. She took one look at me when I walked in the door and said in a very thick Jamaican accent, "Oh, something's gonna get you, honey." Fast forward to Savannah. I was walking back from dinner to my hotel, and it was starting to get dark, and a minivan pulled up next to me full of a mom, dad, and kids. The mom says to me, let us give you a ride. I'm thinking, well, then she whispers that they noticed someone suspicious following me and was afraid that I would get mugged. So that's the first and last time I've accepted a ride from strangers, but I took the gamble.
That sounds like a strange set of events. I mean, getting warned about someone following you is unsettling. I can see why you'd think twice about accepting a ride from strangers, but it's cool that they looked out for you. It's funny how a quirky encounter can lead to something serious later on. All in all, just shows you never know what's gonna happen, especially in a new place like Savannah.
Left my window open one night and learned never to do it again. I wake up in the middle of night with a large weight on my back. My first thought is sleep paralysis, but unfortunately I can move just fine. I then slowly pull all extremities under the confines of the blankets. As I do this, I feel the weight shift accompanied by a series of extremely loud raptor noises. After maybe an hour of laying perfectly still and feeling the weight shift around, it finally disappears to the sound of beating wings. TLDR, freakishly huge buzzard. Edit. After some comments, I should clarify that a large buzzard is merely a guess. Afterwards, I went down and got some water. The mud was still there the next morning, so I figured it wasn't a nightmare. The only large birds in the area are buzzards and golden eagles, and I highly doubt that it was an eagle.
That's a strange experience. Waking up to something heavy on your back is definitely unsettling. It's weird how your mind goes to sleep paralysis first. Those loud noises must have been intense too. I can imagine lying there, trying to figure out what's happening. At least it was just a buzzard and not something worse. I get why you keep your window closed after that night.
When I was little, I used to sleepwalk, and it seemed to get out of hand when this happened. I had a dream that I watched myself in third person get up and go to the bathroom, and my mom was standing there asking why I was awake so late. I explained that I had to go to the bathroom. I then went back to sleep. The next day, I felt the urge to bring up the dream, so I asked her about it. She was certain I sleptwalked, and that I wouldn't remember a thing I usually didn't. I actually watched myself in third person.
That's pretty wild. Sleepwalking is something I've heard about, but seeing yourself like that is rare. It's strange to have a dream that feels so real, then find out it actually happened. It's like being in a movie where you are both the actor and the audience. Makes you think about how strange our minds can be while we're asleep. Guess it's good your mom was there to keep things safe.
When I was 8, I was exploring the woods behind my house with a friend. We came to a small clearing when I saw a black figure jump between two trees. To this day, I can recall the figure having the shape of a girl in a dress. It was a pure silhouette, no other features. I froze for a second and continued on, thinking I had just imagined something when my friend behind me says, "Did you see that?" We looked at each other for a moment before booking it out of there. After that, the woods behind his house felt too eerie for us to explore. I'm not a very superstitious person, but I do believe there are things out there that we don't have a grasp on, and to this day, I believe that I witnessed one of those things.
That's a pretty intense experience for being so young. Exploring the woods can be fun, but when you see something like that, it really changes the vibe. It's interesting how something so simple can make a place feel completely different. I get why the woods felt eerie after that. Sometimes our minds just latch onto experiences we can't explain, and it sticks with us.
I think I was 9 or 10. My mom and I were pulling into the driveway on a really wintry/snowy day. The house across the street had been vacant for quite some time, but we noticed there was a police car out front. As we started to shovel the driveway, the cop comes over and asks, "Can we borrow your shovel? We have to get the body out of the garage." Turns out the real estate agent died in the garage and was there for an undetermined amount of days. That night, my cat decided to walk on the piano keys for the first and only time.
That's an interesting story. I can imagine how strange it must have felt at that age. A police car, a body, and then your cat oddly playing the piano. It's like a sudden shift from something intense to something oddly calm. A mix of life and death in such a short time. Shows how weird things can happen while you're just doing everyday stuff.
This happened a couple of years ago. I woke up one morning. I had one of those bad dreams where you wake up in a rush and immediately sit up. This time it was different though. I had a cigarette in my mouth. I did not know how it got there. I accidentally breathed some smoke through my nose and started coughing and accidentally put my hand on the cigarette, burning it. Again, I had absolutely no idea why that happened. Worst part? I live alone, my doors and windows were locked, and I don't even smoke. Tried it twice before that. That's it. It wasn't a dream, because I got up and went to work as usual, although scared as hell. And I kept the cigarette but on my table. It was there for weeks afterwards. I threw it away eventually though, so I can't provide pics of it.
That's a pretty bizarre experience. Waking up with a cigarette is odd, especially if you don't smoke. It's like your mind was playing tricks on you. The fact that you were scared and couldn't figure out how it got there adds to the creepiness. Keeping the butt around for weeks is interesting, too. Sometimes, things just happen that we can't explain. It must have made you think twice about your surroundings.
I made eye contact with my doppelganger when I was getting onto the train, and she was exiting. No words were exchanged, but I can't really describe the deeply unnerving, frightening feeling that occurred. You think maybe it would be kind of funny or neat or whatever to see the other you, but no. Creepy as fuck.
I had a similar experience once. I was at a coffee shop, and I saw someone who looked just like me when I was in college. It was weird. We didn't acknowledge each other, but it felt like I was looking in a mirror. It gave me this strange vibe, like I was staring into a different timeline or something. Just made me feel off for the rest of the day.
I used to have sleep paralysis a lot as a kid. I still get it on occasion, but back then it was like once a month. I saw the old hag, aliens, shadowy figures, heard voices. Pretty much everything that can happen has happened to me. The worst one I ever had was when I woke up not able to breathe, seeing an old lady sitting on my chest, not moving, just staring at me and smiling. The feeling of being convinced I was going to die has stuck with me 8 years later.
That sounds pretty intense. I've had my share of weird dreams, but sleep paralysis takes it to another level. It's strange how your mind can play tricks on you when you're stuck between sleep and waking. I remember hearing about similar experiences from friends. They often say it's terrifying, but it's oddly fascinating too. At least it makes for some interesting stories, even if they're not fun to live through.
I was dating a guy in college, until he randomly dropped out without telling anyone. The next year, he randomly shows up on campus and tells me that he joined the Army and is living in a military base in NC. I made it clear that I didn't want anything to do with him, and he seems to accept that. Until the next weekend, when he shows up again and spends hours sitting on a bench by himself outside of my dorm. He ends up doing this for the next 3 weekends, ostensibly driving 400 miles each way to sit outside my dorm room for hours, and then leaving. One day he stopped, and I never heard from him again. I have no idea what happened to him.
That's a wild situation. The way he just dropped out and showed up later like nothing happened is strange. I mean, sitting outside the dorm for hours sounds more obsessive than anything. It's kind of unsettling that he just disappeared again without a word. Makes you wonder what was going through his mind. Sometimes people just don't know how to handle things properly. Wonder if he's okay.
Waiting one night, about 2 a.m., to do a software build in Cheyenne Mountain. I'm hanging around in the parking lot having a smoke when I see a strange little figure about 100 yards away. Couldn't quite make it out, so I started walking that way, and as I got closer I saw that it was a jackrabbit. A very large, about 2 feet tall, maybe more, badly deformed jackrabbit. He had one shoulder much higher than the other, and moved with a weird loping, not at all like a rabbit. I walked closer still, and he just stopped and stared at me. That's when I realized that 1, he wasn't scared of me, and 2, I wasn't sure I could say the same about him. Later, I was telling the gate guard what I'd seen, and several of the MPs took off running to try and get a shot. From what the remaining guards said, it was a rabbit that had spent a bit too much time by the antenna farm or something.
That's an interesting encounter. Seeing a large, deformed jackrabbit in the middle of the night must have been a bit unsettling. The way it just stared back at you had to feel eerie. I can imagine how the MPs reacted when they heard about it. You don't see wild animals like that every day, especially not in such a strange condition. Guess some things get affected differently by their environment.
A friend and I were getting ready to go pick up dinner at night. As we're walking down my driveway, we see a car parked at the end. Unsure who it was and why they were outside my house, I walk down and peer through the window. Inside is a well-dressed man and woman. They're looking straight ahead, no expression. I tap on the window to try and talk to them, and they remain motionless, still staring forward. I go back inside with my friend to call my parents to ask what to do. I go back outside to get a plate number, and they're gone. Never saw them again.
That's kind of eerie. Just a normal dinner run turns into a weird encounter. I can imagine how unsettling it must have felt to see those two just sitting there. The fact they didn't react and then vanish like that adds to the mystery. It's funny how some moments stick with you, even when nothing really happens. Just makes you think about things differently after.
Not really as creepy as everyone else's, but a few years ago, I moved to a different part of town. Not that far, but far enough to start going to a new set of stores, restaurants, etc. I started noticing at more and more places I went, everyone kept recognizing me and kept calling me Dan, which isn't my name. Like at restaurants, at first, the servers didn't take my order and bought me some random dish and told me, here's your usual. I might have a long-lost twin I might not know of.
That's a weird situation to be in. Must feel strange having people think they know you. Could be a case of mistaken identity, or maybe someone who looks like you is a regular around there. Imagine running into that person one day. It's kind of funny though, people just assuming you're someone else. Could lead to some interesting conversations if you ever meet them.
One time, I was causing havoc in the late hours of the night with my friends when I was around 12. We saw this person walking in the street, so we hid in a bush to wait it out. The person was wearing a cloak and hat, sort of old-timey looking, and as he was walking across the street, I kid you not, he just started floating up towards the street light. We thought we were hallucinating, but my friends and myself all saw it. He just kind of disappeared as he floated up. We ran home and went to sleep and never really talked about it again.
That sounds wild. I've had a few strange nights with friends too. Once, we heard some weird noises in the woods and decided to investigate. We saw what looked like a glowing figure. We thought it was just our minds playing tricks, so we took off. The next day, no one would talk about it either. Weird stuff happens, and sometimes it's better to leave it at that.
In my last 2 years of high school, I would very frequently have notes left on my car. Usually, they were oddly sexual rap lyrics. This happened on average once a week. High school ended, I bought a new car. Went off to college. 2 weeks later, I walked out to my car to find another note containing oddly sexual rap lyrics. I never told people about the notes until I received the one in college.
That's a weird coincidence. It's funny how you thought it was over after high school, then bam, it happens again. I guess it shows how some things just follow you around. Maybe someone thought they were being funny or just liked your car. But yeah, that's definitely a unique way to get noticed. It's not every day you find random notes like that.
Probably a little late, but here we go. I had this girl stay over one night. We stayed up kind of late, but I was still very surprised that I had slept in till almost noon. She was already out of bed and cooking breakfast. I asked her why she let me sleep in so late. Confused, she let me know it was 8 a.m. I looked at my watch and told her that my watch stopped. She turned white, and then with a very nervous voice, she asked if it stopped around 11:40. It had. Her watch had stopped at the exact same time as mine. Both were analog. Hers was battery-powered, and mine was wind-up. She had to replace the battery, but my set knob was pulled out, which stops it. That is the creepiest of a long list of odd things that happened in that house. Came home once, and my guest bed was moved. Had an unplugged sandwich press start heating up. Dog would stare at nothing like there was something there all the time. You know, normal poltergeist stuff? Edit. Forgot about the toaster that moved across the counter as I walked by it. Fuck that house.
Sounds like that house had a weird vibe. The stopped watches are creepy. It's strange how both of you had similar issues at the same time. The other stuff, like the moving furniture and the dog staring into space, adds to that unsettling feeling. No surprise about the toaster too. It's one of those places that gives you the heebie-jeebies for sure. Probably not a good idea to stick around there too long.
When I was in freshman year of high school, my ex used to call me every day to tell me what I was wearing that day. She didn't go to the same school. She was just timing it, so when her mom took her to school, they drove past me. But I was nearly across the street from the school, so they had a 1-minute window. Then I found out it was her mother making her do this, because she had decided we had to get married.
That's a wild story. It's interesting how parents can sometimes have a say in young relationships. I can imagine being called to be checked on every day would get old fast. But the idea of someone planning your future like that just seems off. It really shows how young love can get complicated, sometimes in ways you don't even expect.
Well, not sure if it's the creepiest, but one time when I was younger, maybe like 10 to 12, I wandered away from my grandmother in the store. I was just casually checking everything out when I felt someone's presence behind me. I turned around, and there was an old man literally inches away from me. I'm 100% convinced he was sniffing my hair.
That's a wild experience. I guess wandering off can lead to some strange encounters. That old man sounds really unsettling, just standing there so close. It's weird how those moments stick with you. I remember a time when I got lost in a mall, just looking around, but nothing like that happened to me. It's funny how curious we are as kids, even if it leads to creepy situations.
I was driving to work one morning and stopped at the gas station first. There was a guy in his car as I walked in. He sat in his car until I came out, then pulled out onto the street. I turned behind him and ended up at a red light waiting to make a left turn. Dude gets out of his car and motions for me to follow him, and then got in his car and drove off. Needless to say, I did not follow.
That sounds pretty odd. It's always a bit unsettling when strangers try to get your attention like that. It's smart not to follow people when they act sketchy. Sometimes it's just better to stick to your own plans and keep things safe. You never really know what's going on in someone else's head. Glad you played it cool and kept your distance.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.